The year is 1871. Smoke coils through the cold January air above Versailles. Inside the Hall of Mirrors, light fractures across gold and glass as boots echo on marble floors. The world holds its breath. A man in Prussian blue stands tall, Wilhelm, soon to be emperor, as voices rise in unison. Heil Kaiser Wilhelm! Beyond those walls, snow falls quietly on a wounded Europe. The cannons of the Franco-Prussian War have just fallen silent, but the sound of empire, iron-shod and inevitable, is only beginning. In that frozen dawn of modern power, a dynasty forged its legend. The Hohenzollerns, a family whose ambition carved the shape of a continent, whose pride built nations and doomed millions. This is their story, the rise and ruin of an empire made of steel, fire, and human will. The Iron Roots, 1450–1701. The winter wind of Brandenburg cuts like a blade. It whispers through the bare trees, rattles the iron gates of forgotten keeps, and carries with it the smell of peat smoke and cold stone. In the dim glow of a torch, a rider approaches the gates of a crumbling castle, the emblem of a black eagle carved above the arch. The year is 1450, and the Holy Roman Empire is little more than a patchwork of feuding lords and fragile loyalties. But from these ashes, one family will rise, the Hohenzollerns, bound not by divine right, but by an unyielding will. They began as mere Burgraves of Nuremberg, stewards of other men's lands, servants to greater crowns. Yet even then, something glimmered behind their careful eyes. Calculation, endurance, the quiet patience of iron before it's forged. When Frederick VI, later Frederick I of Brandenburg, received his fief from Emperor Sigismund in 1415, few could imagine the fire that would grow from that single act. "This land," he reportedly murmured as he first surveyed the marshes and woods of Brandenburg, "will obey us, or it will perish trying." Brandenburg was poor, divided, and half drowned in its own rivers. Its people feared the forests and distrusted their rulers. Yet Frederick set about transforming it not with mercy, but with method. He ruled like a blacksmith, hammering chaos into order, shaping obedience from decay. His soldiers patrolled the roads, his clerks recorded every tax, his envoys married strategically. The empire's chaos was his opportunity. And the Hohenzollerns learned early that power, once seized, must never sleep. Generations passed, each son tightening the grip a little more. When Frederick II died, his successor found a realm held together not by love, but by discipline, a fragile peace kept through fear and respect. But in that fragile soil lay the seeds of something far greater, the idea of a state as a living machine, each gear turning with precision, each citizen a cog within the greater mechanism. By the 1600s, Europe trembled. The 30 Years' War tore the continent apart, cities burned, faiths collided, and millions died. For Brandenburg, it was both a crucible and a curse. Armies marched through like storms, leaving villages gutted and fields salted. The Elector George William fled his own capital, hiding from Swedish and imperial troops alike. His people starved while foreign kings played chess with his fate. But history often spares a single ember amid the ashes. When George William's son, Frederick William, returned from exile, he swore that Brandenburg would never again be so helpless. He was only 20. The world would call him the great Elector, but in those early years he was something simpler, a man who refused to kneel. In letters from his campaigns he wrote, "We must make of this broken land a fortress, not for glory but so that no man may trample us again." His soldiers marched through rain and ruin, rebuilding fortresses stone by stone. He reformed the army, centralized the treasury, and silenced his nobles with a mix of iron and persuasion. Under him, Brandenburg Prussia became less a province and more an idea, the first heartbeat of Prussian identity. When the smoke cleared, the once forgotten marchlands had become a disciplined engine of survival. The people had learned to obey, to endure, to work as if God himself measured their steps. And in that obedience, the Hohenzollerns found their true strength. As one historian later wrote, they did not rule a people, They built one. And yet, beyond the cold precision of their politics, something darker began to take root. A belief that control was not only necessary, but sacred. The great Elector ruled as though destiny had spoken directly to him through the thunder of cannons. The Brandenburg that he inherited was a graveyard of ruin. The Brandenburg he left was a military power, small in size, but immense in will. He rebuilt the state brick by brick like a mason possessed. Canals were dug to link rivers, roads paved across wasteland, fortresses raised against an untrustworthy world. In the heart of Berlin, the Hohenzollerns palace grew taller, its stone LLS gleaming like the promise of permanence. But behind those walls, the air was always tense, filled with the sounds of boots on marble and the scratching of quills drafting decrees late into the night. Frederick William, the great Elector, was not loved. He did not seek to be. Love, he believed, was a weakness that rulers could not afford. A prince, he once told his ministers, is not born for peace. He is born for vigilance. His ministers feared him, but they worked without question. His soldiers admired him, but never smiled in his presence. His people obeyed, for in obedience lay survival. Under his vision, the army became the soul of the state, not merely a tool of conquest, but an institution of identity. It trained not only soldiers, but citizens, shaping loyalty, humility, and precision into the marrow of Prussian life. Boys grew up hearing the drum before the lullaby. Discipline became not only a virtue, but a religion. His reforms were brutal and brilliant. He imposed taxes directly, stripping the old nobility, the Junkers, of much of their autonomy, but rewarding them with military rank. In this bargain, a new order was born, one where the sword and the plow shared a single hand. The Junker officer became the archetype of Prussian virtue, austere, dutiful, unbending. Foreign diplomats described Brandenburg as a state that lives on its nerves. But beneath its cold surface, a furnace burned, the dream of permanence in a world that respected only strength. The great Elector's victories over the Swedes and Poles were not mere territorial gains. They were symbols that Brandenburg could, through will and discipline, carve a destiny out of chaos. Yet as the Elector aged, the price of that destiny began to show. His family feared him. His courtiers walked on eggshells. In the candle-lit halls of Berlin, his children whispered of the man who never smiled. One of his sons once wrote, "He speaks to us as he speaks to soldiers. Even in love, he commands." But power, once made absolute, has a strange way of turning inward. It reshapes those who wield it. When Frederick William died in 1688, the bells of Berlin tolled for 3 days. Peasants lined the roads to see his coffin pass, not out of affection, but awe. "He made us Prussians," one farmer murmured, "and perhaps that is enough." His son, Frederick III, inherited a disciplined machine, but also a restless ambition. For the great Elector had left him a prophecy. "The crown is not far now. Take it when the world forgets to stop you." The younger Frederick was nothing like his father. Where the great Elector was iron, he was silk, elegant, cultured, and shrewd. He loved art, ceremony, and the theater of power. He transformed Berlin from a fortress into a capital, inviting scholars, painters, and architects to shape it into the Athens on the Spree. But beneath the grandeur lay calculation. Frederick understood that titles could wield as much power as armies. While his father had forged the sword, Frederick would claim the crown. When the chaos of European politics brought him the opportunity, amid the War of the Spanish Succession, he seized it. In 1701, he crowned himself Frederick I, king in Prussia. The coronation at Königsberg was a spectacle of gold and incense, but the world's silence afterward was louder than any applause. Europe, weary of war, did not object. And so, a new word entered history: Prussia. As the organ thundered through the cathedral and courtiers bowed low, Frederick raised his crown and whispered, "We have forged this from iron and obedience." Outside, the snow fell over the frozen Vistula, quiet as the turning of an age. The dynasty of the Hohenzollerns had crossed a threshold, from the rulers of a province to the architects of an empire. But behind the ceremony, an unease lingered. For in the shadow of that crown, something had been lost, the humility of survival, replaced by the hunger for greatness. The iron roots had taken hold. Now they would begin to grow, upward, outward, unstoppable. In the weeks after his coronation, King Frederick I wandered the silent corridors of his new palace in Königsberg. The echo of the ceremony still haunted the halls, the swelling music, the trembling oaths, the weight of a crown freshly cooled from the goldsmith's fire. Yet in the stillness that followed, he felt something unfamiliar: isolation. The dream of a kingdom had been realized, but the soul of it, the meaning behind the iron, remained unfinished. Outside, the carriages of his nobles departed through the snow. Candles flickered out one by one. In the great hall, the Prussian standard, black eagle on white, hung heavy in the torchlight. It was beautiful, severe, and cold, like the land it represented. The world now recognized Prussia as a kingdom, but not yet as a power. To survive, Frederick I needed to maintain the delicate machinery his father had built: the army, the bureaucracy, the unbending hierarchy that kept the realm alive. But he lacked his father's austerity. He loved spectacle too much, spent gold like poetry, and trusted in ceremony more than steel. His court glittered with imported luxury, velvet, silver, porcelain, even as his peasants still plowed frozen fields. Courtiers whispered that the king loved crowns more than causes, art more than armor. Yet even in his indulgence, something of the Hohenzollern fire endured. He expanded schools, strengthened trade, and above all, preserved the army as the heart of the state. For beneath the silks and sonatas, Frederick knew what his bloodline had always known: power must never be allowed to rest. When he died in 1713, his son, Frederick William I, stood before the coffin and said nothing. He watched the golden casket lower into the earth, then turned to his ministers and declared, "There will be no more waste, no more vanity. Prussia will be a sword, not a jewel." And so, with those words, the iron roots of the Hohenzollerns hardened into steel. The dream of order became obsession. The state became the army, and the army became the state. The wind swept through Berlin that spring like a new breath of discipline. Drums replaced music. Austerity replaced pageantry. The black eagle spread its wings wider. The iron roots had given rise to a kingdom unlike any other, not built on love, nor faith, nor wealth, but on precision, obedience, and an unshakable belief in destiny. The world had yet to realize it, but something had awakened in the heart of Europe, something that would one day set the continent ablaze. The age of kings was far from over. In Prussia, it had only just begun. The Soldier King, 1701–1786. The dawn breaks over Berlin, gray, sharp, and cold. The streets are still slick from night rain, and the bells of the garrison church toll like iron hearts. From the windows of the royal palace, smoke curls upward, pale against the morning sky. Inside, the new king, Frederick William I, paces the marble corridor in silence. He despises the perfume of the previous court. The velvet curtains, the crystal chandeliers, the foreign flattery, all of it offends him. His father's love of ceremony has left the treasury bleeding, and the King of Prussia is determined to cauterize the wound. When courtiers arrive to offer congratulations, he greets them not with banquets but with dismissal. The musicians are sent away. The silks are sold. The palace stables are emptied of fine horses. And when the servants ask what shall replace it all, the king answers simply, "Discipline." Frederick William I will be remembered by history as the Soldier King, and his reign begins not with a coronation, but a purge. He abolishes unnecessary offices, forbids luxury, and introduces a code of efficiency so absolute that even the flicker of waste feels like treason. He wears a plain blue uniform every day, the same cut as his soldiers. He eats boiled cabbage and black bread. His court becomes a barracks, his capital a drill ground. To his mind, A ruler should be first among servants, not first among Sybarites. Kings, he says, are born to labor as oxen are born to plow. But his labor is not gentle. He expands his father's army until it becomes the very skeleton of the state, an organism of uniformed precision. The Prussian soldier becomes a new creature in Europe, part man, part mechanism. Drilled, measured, and molded from childhood, he learns that hesitation is sin, and obedience salvation. The king personally inspects regiments, watching as muskets rise and fall in unison, as if the nation itself breathes to a single rhythm. The air of Berlin hums with the beat of drums, the clang of sabers, the bark of commands echoing through cobbled streets. And yet this iron paradise is built on fear. Frederick William's temper is legendary, sudden, and volcanic. Ministers tremble before him, generals bow too quickly, even his own family learns to speak in whispers. At court, laughter dies on tongues. His son, Prince Frederick, grows up beneath that shadow. A child of brilliance and imagination, he plays the flute and reads French poetry in secret. But his father sees such beauty as weakness, corruption. "I will not have a poet for a son," the king shouts during one of their many quarrels. "You were born to serve, not to dream." Their conflict will become legend, the battle between duty and desire, iron and art. In one chilling moment, Frederick William catches his son planning to flee the kingdom with a friend. The king's fury is biblical. He imprisons Frederick, executes his companion before his eyes, and nearly has the prince condemned to death. Only the pleading of ministers and the cold intervention of reason spares him. The young prince emerges from his cell silent, watchful, transformed. In his diary, he later writes, "From that day I learned that to rule, one must be master not only of others, but of oneself." The seed of the philosopher king and of the conch, roar to come, begins to germinate in that darkness. Meanwhile, Frederick William rules with relentless purpose. He leaves behind not monuments of marble, but a legacy of readiness. By the time of his death in 1740, the army of Prussia stands at 83,000 men, the fourth largest in Europe, in a kingdom barely the size of modern Poland. Every uniform stitched, every musket polished, every drumbeat aligned, all waiting for the man who will use them. And that man, at last, is ready to take the throne. 1740, a year of uneasy spring. The old king, Frederick William I, is dead. His coffin lies draped in blue and black, flanked by soldiers who do not weep. They stand motionless, their boots aligned as if even grief must be measured. At the foot of the bier stands his son, Frederick II, soon to be called Frederick the Great. The son who once played the flute in secret, who once dreamed of escape, now inherits an empire of order, iron, and silence. He bows his head, not in sorrow, but in understanding. The kingdom his father built is a machine. His duty now is to set it in motion. When he ascends the throne, the transformation is immediate. The new king writes to his ministers, "Let us be more than soldiers. Let us be a civilization." But Europe will soon learn that Frederick's civilization is one armed to the teeth. He reforms the laws, builds academies, invites philosophers from France, and fills the halls of Sanssouci, his palace at Potsdam, with music, debate, and laughter. Yet even as he quotes Voltaire, he sharpens the sword of Prussia. "It is not enough to have ideas," he tells his generals. "One must have the means to defend them." Frederick's brilliance lies in paradox. He is a monarch who reads Plato, yet invades Silesia, a man who writes poetry about peace while studying the geometry of war. His court becomes a theater of intellect and power, flutes and cannons playing in the same key. When he marches into Austria's lands in 1740, he justifies it with a phrase that will echo through the ages: "Ambition knows no rest." The war of the Austrian succession begins, and the world realizes that the philosopher king is, above all, a general. Frederick moves across Europe like a chess master, anticipating, feinting, striking. His tactics at Malwitz, Hohenfriedberg, and Leuthen redefine modern warfare. His soldiers move as if guided by a single will, drilled into near perfection by his father's iron hand. Every order, every maneuver is executed with clockwork precision. Prussia, a land once dismissed as a cold march of swamps and soldiers, now commands the gaze of emperors. Voltaire writes from Paris, "The king of Prussia fights like Caesar and governs like Marcus Aurelius." Yet glory never comes without cost. The 7 Years' War erupts, a storm that engulfs continents. Frederick's Prussia faces enemies on every border: Austria, France, Russia. His armies fight outnumbered, exhausted, starving. Whole cities are burned, villages turn to ash. Still the king rides among his men, mud clinging to his boots, his uniform torn and blackened with powder. "Courage," he shouts as cannonballs rip through the ranks. "We shall live as free men or die as Prussians." At Kunersdorf his army is shattered. Thousands lie dead in the summer heat. Frederick writes to a friend, "All is lost save my honor, and I believe even that is fading." For a moment, it seems the dream of Prussia will die with him. But fate, ever strange, intervenes. The Empress of Russia dies and her successor, an admirer of Frederick, withdraws his armies. The tide turns. Against all odds, Prussia survives. When peace finally returns in 1763, Europe is changed. The map bears the mark of Prussia, small, sharp, indomitable. And at its center stands a man who has faced ruin and shaped destiny with his will. Frederick rides through the ruins of Saxony, past fields still scarred by cannon fire. Villagers bow as he passes, soldiers salute. He sees the faces of those who survived and those who did not. He says nothing. In his journal that night he writes, "I have won much, I have lost more, but I have proven that in the heart of men lies a power greater than any empire, the power to endure." His words echo what the Hohenzollerns had always known. Empires are not born in marble halls, but in the silence between the drum beats, in discipline, endurance, and the will to rise again. When Frederick the Great returned to Berlin after the 7 Years' War, he did not ride in triumph. There were no parades, no cheering crowds. The city stood quiet, hollowed out by hunger and grief. The king rode through streets of broken windows and charred timbers, his cloak gray with dust. Soldiers lined the avenues, thin as shadows, their eyes hollow. The philosopher king dismounted before the palace and stood a long while, watching the flag of Prussia lift weakly in the cold wind. Around him, the silence of survival was deafening. He entered the council chamber, the same one where his father once thundered, and looked upon the map spread before him. Europe had bled for 7 years. Prussia had survived, yes, but at the cost of everything soft and human. The king saw it now. His people had become what his father dreamed, tireless, obedient, and unbreakable. And in that transformation lay both greatness and tragedy. He restored the country not with glory but with order. Farms were rebuilt, canals reopened, schools founded. Bureaucracy became his new army, ink replacing gunpowder. He ruled from dawn to dusk, writing thousands of decrees in his spidery hand. To one official he wrote, "Govern as I would govern justly, but without sentiment." At Sanssouci, his small, intimate palace on a vine-covered hill, Frederick found his only peace. There, surrounded by philosophers, he debated God and reason, music and mortality. Voltaire called him the first servant of the state. And indeed, that is how Frederick saw himself, not as a king above men, but as the mechanism that kept the machine of Prussia alive. Yet even in his solitude, he carried the weight of ghosts. The ghosts of soldiers lost, of a father's harsh love, of a nation that demanded perfection at the expense of tenderness. In his final years, he walked alone through the palace gardens, his cane striking the gravel in steady rhythm. Visitors often found him silent, gazing toward the east, toward the lands he had fought to keep, and the wars yet to come. When he died in 1786, there was no grandeur. He asked to be buried beside his dogs, in a simple grave beneath the terraces of Sanssouci. The inscription on his tomb read only, Hierer liegt Friedrich der Gross, here lies Frederick the Great. But his legacy was not buried with him. The army he built, the discipline he embodied, the relentless belief in will and order, all of it remained, echoing through the generations. For the dynasty of the Hohenzollerns, the age of iron had become the age of empire. The drums would sound again, louder and far more terrible. Fire and Crown, 1786, 1871. The summer of 1786 brought the end of an age. Frederick the Great was dead, and Prussia, weary, scarred, yet unbroken, stood at the edge of a new century. The Enlightenment had kindled Europe's intellect, but beneath its glow, the fuse of revolution was already burning. In Berlin, the air was different now, restless, questioning. The rigid harmony Frederick had built began to crack under the weight of ideas he himself had once nurtured. His successor, Frederick William II, was a man of feeling rather than philosophy. He loved art and music, but not order, faith, but not reason. The machine of Prussia slowed, its gears grinding with indecision. As the French Revolution erupted in 1789, the shockwave struck every throne in Europe. Monarchs watched, horrified, as kings were dragged through the streets of Paris to the guillotine. The air smelled of smoke and iron once more. Prussia marched with Austria to crush the flames of revolution, but the world had already changed. The old order was dying, and no army could stop the tide. Frederick William III inherited the throne amid chaos. Napoleon's armies thundered across the continent, sweeping away ancient borders as easily as dust. In 1806, at Jena and Auerstedt, Prussia, once the terror of Europe, was humiliated. Its vaunted army collapsed in days. The dream of Frederick the Great lay shattered in the mud of Saxony. Berlin fell silent. The French flag flew over the royal palace. The Prussian eagle, once feared, now hung limp in defeat. For a moment, it seemed the Hohenzollerns would vanish into history. But defeat in Prussia was never the end. It was the anvil. Out of the wreckage rose a new generation, men of reform and resolve. Stein and Hardenberg rebuilt the state from the ruins, tearing down feudal privileges, opening schools, modernizing administration. They transformed the humiliation of defeat into the discipline of rebirth. And among the officers and cadets who watched these reforms unfold stood young soldiers who would one day lead Prussia's resurrection, men like Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, and Clausewitz. They saw that the soul of war had changed. No longer could armies march as machines. Now nations themselves must rise to fight. When Napoleon finally fell in 1815, Prussia was reborn not as a conqueror but as a survivor. Its troops marched into Paris, not for revenge but for vindication. On the ruins of empire, Prussia found again its favorite lesson: strength through endurance. But the scars of defeat had left a deeper mark. The dream of unity, of a Germany not divided among princes but forged into one, began to stir. It whispered in lecture halls, in taverns, in the marching songs of students. The people longed for nationhood, the Hohenzollerns for restoration. Between those two forces, history began to tremble again. Frederick William III, cautious and burdened by memory, hesitated. He feared the fire of revolution more than he desired the flame of unity. And so, for decades, Prussia waited, patient, calculating, sharpening its sword in the shadows. The 19th century dawned over Europe like a storm forming beyond the horizon. Steam and steel began to reshape the world. Empires turned into engines, and in the quiet corridors of Berlin's ministries, a name began to circulate, whispered with both admiration and fear. Otto von Bismarck. He was not yet the Iron Chancellor, only a young diplomat with piercing eyes and a taste for both theology and whiskey. But even then, he spoke of destiny the way others spoke of weather. "We are not philosophers," he once said. "We are smiths. The world will be shaped by hammer and flame." The world, as it turned out, was listening. By the mid-19th century, Europe pulsed with contradictions, industry and faith, order and revolution, crowns trembling over restless crowds. Railways stitched the continent together like veins of iron, carrying coal, soldiers, and ideas. Empires that had stood for centuries now felt the ground move beneath them. In the midst of it all, Prussia waited, silent, vigilant, unassuming. But within that silence, Otto von Bismarck was building something vast and invisible, a network of inevitability. He was not a soldier, nor a poet, nor a man easily loved. But Bismarck understood power as few ever have. He called himself a practical idealist, yet his ideal was domination. He believed that nations were not born from constitutions or philosophy, but from force, real force. The great questions of the time, he declared to the Parliament in 1862, will not be decided by speeches and majority decisions, but by iron and blood. The phrase scandalized Europe and defined it. King Wilhelm I, an aging monarch of rigid duty, had wanted compromise. His ministers pleaded for diplomacy. Bismarck, newly appointed minister-president, offered war. But not reckless war, crafted war, surgical and deliberate. He would forge Germany in 3 strikes, each one planned like a symphony. The first came against Denmark in 1864, over 2 duchies whose names most of Europe barely remembered, Schleswig and Holstein. To Bismarck, they were not lands, they were keys. Prussia and Austria, temporary allies, crushed Denmark with swift efficiency. The victory was small in size but immense in symbolism. The German people began to believe that destiny wore a Prussian uniform. Then Bismarck turned on Austria. He smiled, drank, and plotted. "We must not destroy them," he said to his generals, "only dethrone them." He provoked conflict with surgical precision, diplomatic deceit, strategic insults, alliances drawn and dissolved like threads in a loom. In 1866, the Austro-Prussian War erupted. It lasted 7 weeks. 7 weeks, and the empire of the Habsburgs, ancient and gilded, fell before Prussia's organized fury. At Königgrätz, the thunder of Krupp artillery echoed through Bohemia. Prussian troops advanced in perfect formation, their rifles loading faster, firing farther, striking harder. The Austrian line shattered. When the smoke cleared, Europe could no longer deny what it had seen. Prussia had become the iron heart of the German world. But Bismarck, ever cautious, stopped short of humiliation. He refused to march on Vienna, refused to destroy Austria completely. "We must build with their ruins, not on their graves," he said. He had what he wanted, the leadership of Germany's northern states, a crown still loyal to him, and a king who now trusted his ruthlessness. In Berlin, as cannons fired in celebration, Wilhelm I looked upon his minister and murmured, "You have done in 7 weeks what my ancestors could not in 2 centuries." Bismarck bowed, a faint smile beneath his mustache. "Majesty," he said, "this is but the 2nd act. The 3rd would be the most daring and the bloodiest." France, proud and powerful under Emperor Napoleon III, looked uneasily eastward. A united Germany would be a rival too great to ignore. Bismarck knew this. He needed France not as an enemy of the moment, but as the instrument of unity. So he set his final trap, a telegram, deceptively edited, sent from Ems in 1870. A few words, rearranged with surgical malice, transformed a polite exchange between Prussian and French officials into a public insult. Paris erupted. Newspapers screamed for vengeance. Crowds demanded war. Napoleon III, cornered by pride, declared it. In Berlin, Bismarck read the news without surprise. "They have taken the bait," he said. "Now Germany will rise." And rise it did. Prussian armies, joined by other German states, thundered across France with the precision of a single machine. The old dynastic squabbles dissolved overnight. Protestant marched beside Catholic, Bavarian beside Saxon. For the first time in history, Germans fought as one nation under the iron banner of Prussia. At Sedan, Napoleon III was captured, Paris itself fell under siege. SM. Oak filled the air, and the light of empire flickered. Bismarck had done it. By iron and blood, by cunning and cruelty, he had turned a kingdom into an empire. But one act remained, the final, terrible ceremony. January 18, 1871. The Hall of Mirrors in Versailles blazes with light. Crystals glint like frost, gold leaf glows like fire. The air hums with breath and silence. Outside, snow drifts against the windows. Inside, the destinies of nations converge. Otto von Bismarck stands in the front rank, his uniform dark, his eyes unreadable. Around him, generals and princes, men who once called each other rivals, now bow their heads toward one figure standing before the mirrors, King Wilhelm I of Prussia. The old man hesitates, his gloved hand trembling slightly. Then he takes the crown, a circlet of gold and history, and places it upon his head. The sound that follows is not merely applause, it is the echo of centuries. Heil Kaiser Wilhelm. The shout rises deafening from every corner of the hall. Flags unfurl, sabers flash. In that instant, the German Empire is born, not in peace but in triumph. The mirrors reflect the faces of men who believe they have conquered destiny itself. Yet if one looks closely, behind the gleam, there is something else reflected, the faint, ghostly image of smoke and fire yet to come. Bismarck, standing slightly apart, allows himself one breath of satisfaction. His work is complete. Germany is united under Prussian steel. But even as the cheers thunder, his mind turns already to what must follow. Balance, restraint, the delicate maintenance of the empire he has forced into existence. "We have created a giant," he murmurs to a fellow officer, "and now we must teach it how to sleep." For the Hohenzollerns, it is the summit of their story, the zenith of their power. From the mud of Brandenburg to the mirrors of Versailles, they have bent time itself to their will. Yet history, ever patient, watches in silence. The very qualities that forged this empire, discipline, pride, ambition, are the same that will one day undo it. As the new emperor departs, sunlight cuts through the windows, scattering shards of light across the marble floor. Each reflection trembles, fleeting as a heartbeat. Outside, the snow continues to fall. Paris lies under siege, starving. Europe, stunned and silent, feels the ground shift beneath it once more. The Age of Kings has entered its final blaze of glory, and beneath the brilliance, the shadows begin to stir. Twilight of Kings, 1871–1918. The empire was born in glory, and, as empires do, it began to rot from within that same golden light. In the first years after Versailles, the German Empire stood tall among the nations. Its railways shone, its armies glittered, its scientists and poets gave it a brilliance no crown alone could grant. Berlin pulsed with confidence, marble facades, gas lamps, and the measured rhythm of a people who believed the century belonged to them. But beneath the brass and ceremony, shadows stirred. Emperor Wilhelm I, the cautious patriarch, ruled with restraint, guided by the steady hand of Bismarck. Together, they maintained a delicate order, the empire as a machine of balance, each gear polished but tightly wound. Bismarck held Europe in quiet awe, weaving treaties and alliances like a spider building its web across the continent. His genius was not conquest but containment, keeping peace through the threat of Prussian discipline. Yet no web lasts forever. In 1888, the year of 3 emperors, time struck swiftly. Wilhelm I died, leaving the throne to his son, Frederick III, a liberal and idealist who dreamed of a more open, enlightened Germany. But Frederick was already dying. Throat cancer consumed him within months, leaving the crown to his son, a young man whose restless energy would shatter the balance Bismarck had spent decades perfecting. Wilhelm II. He entered history like a storm, impetuous, brilliant, insecure. A twisted arm from birth left him in constant pain, both physical and spiritual. His mind was a battlefield between inferiority and destiny, Where his grandfather had ruled with patience, Wilhelm ruled with impulse. He loved uniforms, pageantry, speeches. He adored the mirror and despised restraint. Bismarck saw it at once. The young emperor, he warned, listens to no counsel but his own. But pride cannot share power. Their alliance, iron and intellect, cracked. By 1890, the old chancellor was dismissed. As he left the palace, he looked back once, murmuring, "The pilot has been dismissed from the ship." Without Bismarck, the empire drifted. Wilhelm's Germany raced toward modernity, industry booming, colonies claimed, fleets built to rival Britain's. Yet every success deepened his hunger. "We too demand our place in the sun," he declared, waving his sword before the Reichstag. The world began to listen and fear. In cafes and drawing rooms across Europe, whispers grew. The old balance, the fragile peace of the 19th century, was unraveling. The empire of iron and obedience had grown too strong, too proud, too certain of its destiny. Still, within Germany's borders, there was glory for a time. Music, science, invention, all flourished under the Kaiser's restless gaze. Zeppelins floated over Berlin. Factories thundered like the heartbeat of progress. The people cheered their Kaiser. The generals drilled their armies, and none could imagine the abyss waiting just beyond the next decade. History, however, always imagines it first. In the glitter of Wilhelm's empire, everything seemed eternal, yet everything was fragile. The Kaiser's restless energy drove Germany into an age of steel and spectacle. Railways crisscrossed the plains. Battleships rose from shipyards in Kiel. Banners of black, white, and red fluttered over colonies in Africa and the Pacific. The air was electric with pride, invention, and a dangerous certainty that history itself now spoke German. In Berlin, the Unter den Linden shone with lamps and brass bands. Children saluted soldiers in gleaming pickelhaubes. Merchants toasted to the empire's glory. Poets wrote of destiny and the fatherland. But in quiet rooms, diplomats and generals whispered of something darker, an arms race spiraling beyond control. Across the sea, Britain watched uneasily. France, humiliated since 1871, nursed its vengeance. Russia, vast and unpredictable, shifted like a giant in uneasy sleep. Each nation prepared for war while praying to avoid it. And in the center of it all, Wilhelm stood loud, dramatic, certain that he alone could command the storms. He wrote to his cousin, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, in letters signed, "Your loving Willie." To another cousin, King George of Britain, he signed, "Your affectionate cousin Wilhelm." The monarchs of Europe, bound by blood yet divided by ambition, exchanged pleasantries even as their generals mapped one another's destruction. "War," Wilhelm once said, "is the midwife of history." The midwife was already at the door. In 1914, the spark came, a shot fired in Sarajevo, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The world paused for a heartbeat. Then, like dominoes in firelight, alliances collapsed into motion. Austria declared war on Serbia. Russia mobilized. Germany followed, invoking treaties, duty, pride. Within weeks, Europe was engulfed. When Wilhelm gave his final order for mobilization, he stood on the balcony of his palace before a cheering crowd. "You will be home before the leaves fall," he told his soldiers. The crowd roared, waving flags, their voices trembling with faith. But the leaves fell, and no one came home. The machine Bismarck had built, that perfect engine of discipline and obedience, now devoured its own children. Millions marched beneath the Black Eagle, singing songs of empire, and vanished into trenches that stretched like open wounds across the continent. At first there was glory, swift marches, brass bands, telegrams of victory. Then came mud, gas, silence. In the trenches of the Marne and Ypres, men sank into a new kind of hell. Letters from the front spoke of rats and cold, of dreams of Berlin and mothers' faces blurred by rain. "We fight," one soldier wrote, "not for the Kaiser, nor for the fatherland, but because the man beside me still breathes." Wilhelm, far away in his palace, grew smaller with each passing year of war. His speeches turned frantic. His generals ignored him. The empire that had once seemed unshakable now trembled on the edge of collapse. And in the distance, across the Atlantic, a new voice stirred America. The world that had once been Europe's stage was shifting beneath its feet. By 1918, the German army was starving, its soldiers weary, its people rioting in the streets. The empire's banners were tattered, its cities whispered of revolution. The music of glory had faded to the dull rhythm of hunger. When news reached Wilhelm that his troops were mutinying, he could barely comprehend it. Mutiny, he repeated, disbelieving. In the army of Frederick the Great. Yes, even in that army. The empire of iron had turned to rust. November 1918. The rain falls in slow, relentless threads over the fields of Belgium, washing away the last stains of war. The guns have gone silent, not in victory, but in exhaustion. Along the roads once thundered by cavalry and cannon, men now stumble home in rags, carrying nothing but memories. Europe, the proud stage of kings, lies broken beneath a gray sky. In Spa, Belgium, the Emperor of Germany sits alone. Wilhelm II, the Kaiser of glittering parades, the man who once spoke of destiny, now stares at a telegram with shaking hands. His generals have resigned. His ministers have fled. Berlin has erupted in revolution. The red flags of the workers hang from his palaces. The dynasty of the Hohenzollerns, which ruled for nearly 500 years, has collapsed overnight. A single line in the telegram reads, "The RMY no longer stands with you." He whispers the words again and again, as if disbelief might undo them. Outside, rain taps the window panes like the rhythm of retreat. For the first time in his life, Wilhelm II has no one left to command. In the dawn that follows, he signs his abdication, his name scrawled in trembling ink. He removes the ring of the Prussian eagle from his finger and places it on the desk beside him. For a moment he lingers, as if expecting someone to salute. No one does. The guards have already left. He crosses into the Netherlands, an exile in a borrowed automobile. As the border gate closes behind him, the empire of the Hohenzollerns ends. Berlin burns with banners and songs of a new republic. The statues of emperors are shrouded in smoke. Crowds cheer not for a crown, but for freedom, raw, uncertain, fragile. The palaces stand empty, their halls echoing with ghosts. In the Wilhelmstrasse, a child tugs at his mother's sleeve and asks, "Will the Kaiser come back?" She looks at the sky. "No," she says softly, "he will not." In a quiet house in Dorn, years later, Wilhelm II tends his garden in silence. He wears a worn field coat and trims roses with careful precision. Sometimes he hums a march under his breath. When thunder rolls across the Dutch hills, he stands at the window, straightens his back, and for a fleeting second imagines it is the sound of his armies returning. But no one comes. The empire forged in iron and fire has dissolved into the mud of memory. The world has changed. The age of kings is gone, but their shadows remain. The last shadow, 1918 present. The guns of the Great War have fallen silent. Europe lies in ruins, cities gutted, fields cratered, hearts hollowed. In the void left by empires, the 20th century begins, restless and cruel. For the first time in 500 years, the Hohenzollern name carries no crown. The black eagle that once flew over half of Europe has been plucked bare. The Weimar Republic rises in its place, fragile, uncertain, stitched together from desperation and hope. The old palaces of Berlin stand empty, their marble halls echoing with the sound of wind and broken glass. In exile in Dorn, Wilhelm II lives out his days in self-imposed grandeur. He chops wood at dawn, walks among his roses, and reads the papers that still speak his name with bitterness. His world has vanished, but he cannot let it go. "The English," he mutters to a visitor, "have destroyed civilization." Yet the truth sits quietly beside him, unspoken. The civilization that he believed in destroyed itself. In Germany, memory turns to hunger. Inflation devours the mark. The veterans of the trenches return home with empty eyes and bitter tongues. They speak of betrayal, of weakness, of an empire stolen. And in the smoke-filled beer halls of Munich, a new kind of voice begins to rise, not imperial but fanatical. It speaks of rebirth, destiny, purity. It promises not a return to monarchy but to myth. The Hohenzollerns watch from afar as another man, small and furious, begins to echo their old language of iron and will. Adolf Hitler does not wear a crown, but he inherits their ghosts. He admires their discipline, their unity, their myth of destiny. He twists it into something monstrous. Some among the old aristocracy, even within the Hohenzollern bloodline, see in him a possible restoration, a tool to bring back the throne. They lend him quiet support, blind to the abyss beneath his words. But the abyss swallows all. When the Nazi regime rises, it wears the trappings of the past, eagles, marches, banners, but the soul beneath is darker, stripped of all restraint. The dream of iron that once built Prussia now becomes a nightmare of fire. As the world plunges into its second war in a generation, the dynasty that once forged Europe becomes a ghost haunting its destruction. The palaces that once symbolized power are consumed by bombs. Sanssouci burns. Berlin falls again. And in that fall, not only a nation but a legacy disintegrates. The Hohenzollerns vanish into the smoke, exiled, scattered, forgotten. Their empire has become a cautionary tale, but history, even in ashes, continues to whisper. When the smoke clears in 1945, Germany is no longer a kingdom, nor even a nation in the old sense. It is a ruin, divided, humbled, occupied. The eagle that once ruled Europe is now a symbol of shame. Among the rubble, the name Hohenzollern is spoken only in whispers. To some, it is ancient history. To others, it is a curse, a reminder of the militarism that led to catastrophe. In the western zones, American and British soldiers photograph the skeletons of palaces, their columns fractured, their portraits torn by fire. At Potsdam, the ceiling of Frederick the Great's old study hangs in tatters. The gardens of Sanssouci, once filled with philosophers and kings, are overgrown with weeds and shell casings. And yet amid the ruins, the dynasty endures, not as rulers but as relics. Wilhelm II dies in exile in 1941, buried in Dutch soil under a stone that bears only his name. No crown, no empire, no eulogy. His sons and grandsons scatter, some to England, others to the remnants of a defeated Germany. They live quietly, their titles stripped, their lands confiscated. For decades they survive in silence, but history, as it often does, begins to stir again. In the 1950s, as Germany divides into East and West, the old Prussian lands fall behind the Iron Curtain. The palaces become museums or ruins, watched over by soldiers of a different empire. The Soviet flag flies over Potsdam. Statues of kings are toppled, their faces chipped by rifle butts. But in the West, a strange nostalgia begins to flicker. The economic miracle transforms the Federal Republic into a land of glass and steel, efficient and pragmatic, almost Prussian in its discipline. And in that new order, some begin to ask, what was lost when the old world vanished? Writers and historians rediscover Frederick the Great, not as a conqueror, but as a symbol of resilience, intellect, and order. His stoic profile appears on coins, his name in school books. The legacy of the Hohenzollerns, long damned, is now dissected, not with reverence but with curiosity. Still, the question lingers like a ghost in the archives. Can a dynasty be absolved of the world it helped create? In 1990, the Berlin Wall falls. East and West embrace, and the ghosts of Prussia awaken once more. The descendants of the Hohenzollerns, led by Prince Georg Friedrich, step out of obscurity. Educated, modern, careful with words, he speaks not of crowns or conquest, but of heritage. "We are not rulers," he says softly in an interview, only custodians of history. But history does not forget so easily. Debates erupt across Germany. Should the family reclaim the properties seized after the war? Do they deserve restitution or responsibility? Historians argue in parliament and press alike, combing through archives of collaboration and complicity. Did some Hohenzollerns aid Hitler's rise? Did their silence grease the gears of tyranny? The arguments rage like distant thunder. For many Germans, it is not about palaces or portraits. It is about guilt, memory, and the moral cost of lineage. Meanwhile, the ruins remain. Visitors walk the gardens of Sanssouci again, tracing the same gravel paths Frederick once paced. The air is quiet, filled with birdsong and history. On the stone steps, children play where soldiers once marched. The past feels close enough to touch, but mercifully distant enough to no longer command. The Hohenzollerns story has shifted from one of power to one of reckoning. They are no longer kings, but witnesses, not rulers, but reminders of what ambition, left unchecked, can destroy. And yet somewhere in the German soul, the echo of the old order remains, not as glory, but as a warning, that greatness forged in iron must always end in fire. The 21st century dawns over Berlin with quiet confidence. The city has risen again, glass towers reflecting the clouds where once stood ruins. Trams hum through the rebuilt streets. The Brandenburg gate glows gold in the evening light. History has not been erased here, only rewritten. Among the tourists who walk the Unter den Linden, few remember that this was once the avenue of emperors. Yet if one listens closely, beneath the rhythm of modern life, echoes still remain: the clatter of hooves, the roll of drums, the faint whisper of banners unfurling in cold wind. The Hohenzollerns remain, too, no longer as rulers, but as custodians of a name older than most nations. They live quiet lives, blending into the modern fabric of Germany. Their titles exist only in courtesy, their estates in memory. And yet, every so often, the past rises to meet them. A television crew films inside the ruins of Charlottenburg. Reporters ask about restitution, about guilt, about the line between inheritance and responsibility. Prince Georg Friedrich, the current head of the family, stands before the camera, his voice calm. "We cannot change what was," he says, "but we can live as if we've learned from it." It is a small sentence, but it carries the weight of centuries. In museums across Berlin, portraits of the old kings hang once more. Frederick the Great, eyes hard and distant. The great Elector, jaw set like stone. Wilhelm II, staring defiantly toward the horizon. The placards beneath them no longer speak of glory, but of complexity, ambition and arrogance, genius and ruin. Visitors pause before them, silent, as if listening to ghosts. Outside Sanssouci, the gardens bloom again each spring. The air smells of lilac and rain. On a small stone terrace beneath the vines lies a grave marked simply Friedrich der Grosse. Visitors leave potatoes there, an old gesture of affection for the king who once fed his starving people with that humble crop. No trumpets, no anthems, no armies, only wind, birds, and the soft murmur of Hist. Already turning the page. The Hohenzollerns began in mud and iron. They rose through war and fire. They fell through pride and blindness. And now, in the quiet dawn of a reconciled Germany, they exist not as rulers, but as reflection, a mirror held up to the human condition itself. Power, it seems, was never their true legacy. The lesson was.